Hi guys, so I am joined today by Jonny Day, who's head of sales operations at Crowdcube. Been with Crowdcube for the last 5 years. Jonny, good to have you on today. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, good morning, Owen. Thank you for having me. Good to be
How
here.
are you? Are you well?
I'm very well, thank you. It's a bit grey today. We're not used to this, but other than that, it's all good.
You've been sitting working out in the garden, have you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, too right. Well, look, thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to get some of your input on our key topics today, and I thought it might make sense to maybe get you to give 2 minutes on your background within Crowdcube and anything else that you've done in your career or that you think you're going to be doing in your career. Tell us a bit about your role and the environment that you work in within the sales industry there at Crowdcube.
Sure. Well, thank you for Wellity for inviting me to this session. I'm currently, like Owen said, head of sales operations at Crowdcube. My time at Crowdcube has been an interesting one because I've actually moved from a digital marketing background actually into a sales role, working on B2B marketing, and then into sales operations. So coming at sales from a slightly different angle, having an experience in data analytics and digital marketing, and then moving more in towards sales operations, sales process, and then using my marketing background around sales operations as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And what made you choose to get into sales, having been on the outside of it? A lot of people end up in sales at the beginning of their career. You saw it and went, oh, I'll go get into that. Was that driven by demand within the organization or by a desire within you, or both?
Yeah, so I think for me, I wanted to get closer to the commercial side of the business, and the way that the company I'm in has structured that is very heavily with the sales team at the front, the finance and the operations team very closely linked. And I think it was a good transition for me to move from marketing into B2B marketing, build those relationships that always exist between sales and marketing, and then take my experience from marketing to show salespeople, and then learn from salespeople to take it to marketing. And that sort of bridging of those teams helped to put me at the sharper end of the numbers and the commercial side of the business, as well as also learning the different skills and relationships and emotions that live within those two departments.
Fantastic. And Jonny, how many people are there within the sales team or the sales operation, and also those associated roles that work closely with the sales team within Crowdcube?
Sure. So the central spine it's actually a big team. It's the biggest part of the business. So we've got about 10 people in sales. We've got about 4 or 5 people in partnerships. And then that extends out into obviously the senior management team who are always selling. And then we've obviously got legal, compliance, and completions who are all actively part of that spine. And then on the other side of the business, we've got marketing, engineering, and product and design. So a big part of the company is obviously focused towards that commercial function.
And I'd imagine that, given, I know about Crowdcube's growth over the last 3-4 years, 5 years, well, since you've been there, certainly, I'll credit it to your time. You've grown exponentially. We're talking, growth quarter to quarter in big numbers. I'd imagine that's a fairly high pressure, fast paced, full on environment for everybody involved.
Yeah, I think, working in startups isn't for everybody. And you have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to adapt. You have to appreciate that, the idea that was manifested last month might have changed, and that, senior management wants to change direction, or your manager wants to change direction. You just have to adapt to that. But that's what test, measure, learn enables you to do. And I think providing you can adapt and be willing to understand that's what being a startup is, and how that connects to progression is super important. But being in a high growth business is also incredibly rewarding, because you are one of the cogs that's making that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important. That self-value, self-worth piece of that journey is one of the real plus points of a startup that's going in the right direction. Having been on that journey myself, I can associate with that. We're here today, obviously, to talk about well-being and well-being within a sales environment and the sales industry. Tell me, how do you define well-being? I know it's important to you. We've spoken before. How do you define it? What is the definition of well-being to you? And how important a role does it play in your career and life generally?
Sure. I mean, I think I think well-being is a huge topic, and it's very difficult to answer. And it's often linked to how you were brought up, how you treat food, how you might treat exercise. And there's a huge way of thinking about well-being, and it does have an impact and affects people in different ways. So this is very much my view of well-being, but I believe that well-being is linked to being happy, being productive, and I also think well-being is finding that balance between friends, family, entertainment, leisure, and exercise. And I've always been a bit of a believer about being part of a tribe. So I think that I've got a healthy balance in my life, which is my family are incredibly important to me. I think that I've got a good tribe of people that I work with, and I've worked hard to foster relationships with those people, because you spend more time at work than you do with your family, so that's important to well-being. And then the last bit is I have a couple of hobbies which I'm incredibly passionate about, and I've made friends and connections through those sports that's helped me to maintain wellness outside of work, as well as hopefully keeping fit.
And what are those hobbies? Tell us about them if you don't mind.
Sure. So I grew up sailing dinghies with my brother, and then from there we went into windsurfing, and that transpired into kite surfing, and then I've been kite surfing since I was at university, so going on nearly sort of 15 years, and that's taken me all over the world. I've met some incredible people, and that's incredibly important for me, and also just a passion for mountain biking and getting out in the nature, in the trees, and out in big open spaces to kind of relax my mind from spreadsheets and numbers and worrying about those sorts of things. Green and water seem to do it for me.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm very much the same. It's about getting outside. And look, your answer perfectly leads into my next question, which is that relationship between the physical and the mental. So you talked about being happy and the connection with people and being part of a community or a tribe, as you talked about, and giving yourself space when you're working in a sales role or as a sales leader. And then you quickly tied it into your physical activity. Those two are so intertwined. How much of a connection do you see personally between your mental well-being and your physical well-being?
So it's an interesting question. I think as a younger individual, I thought that I had to, maybe because it was the way the world works, but I had to be in my chair at my desk, and I was less autonomous, and I thought that was the way that I was going to progress my career, was by just working really, really hard. And I think as I got older, I've got more comfortable with the fact that my brain is a muscle. It needs to be worked hard, it needs to be challenged, and then it needs breaks. And now is a really important time where I try and do a few hours work in the morning, and then I try and either go for a walk or go for a run or go for a cycle. And I just now try and link it to part of my schedule. And I think businesses and your team members are more open and more flexible to you going and doing those things, because they know that it has a positive impact on them, and therefore that it has a positive impact on you. So I think the relationship is really, really, really close, and you just have to make time for exercise, because it enables your brain to rest.
And when we sit here talking about this, we're on the same page. We're talking about how important this is. If you want to be successful in your sales career at whatever level you're at, whether that's as a leader guiding other people or as an individual contributor, you need to give yourself time. You need to give your brain and your body a break. You need to give yourself space to do the things that you enjoy and that take you away from what it is you're trying to do at a career level, in order to be the best you can be in your career. So they trade off against each other. Now, most people I speak to identify that, yet within the day-to-day, we're all pushing each other to go as fast as we can, as hard as we can, all the time. And that's one of the challenges that certainly we see. What challenges do you see in the environments in which you've worked that are a barrier for individual well-being within the sales industry?
I mean, the hardest thing for any salesperson is that whether you're an SDR or a BDM or an account exec or a customer success manager, is often your motivations are linked to bonuses, which are linked to metrics and numbers. And it becomes very, very difficult for you to step away and step to one side if you know you've always got a target on your head. And that then causes the anxiety, and that causes stress, and impacts your well-being. So the hardest thing for anyone is that as a salesperson, you want to hit your numbers and you want to do a good job, but you have to figure out a plan of how you actually get there first. If you don't have a focused plan of how you might get there, then you are going to struggle to hit your numbers, which then has a negative impact on your behavior more broadly.
So this comes back to having goals, clearly communicated goals, and a plan and a process to achieve those goals, which probably won't be 100 mile an hour all the time, but will have those sorts of things built in to allow you to be the best you can be when you're on, and allow you time to switch off and rest.
Yeah, I mean, we all want to achieve, we all want to be successful, we all want to progress, but life is about inputs and outputs. And so if you're running at 100 miles an hour, what you tend to find is you are not the best version of yourself. I mean, definitely as a younger individual, I wanted to try and run at 100 miles an hour. You know, everyone talks about the fact that they can multitask and spin plates. It's not true. You're better when you apply yourself to one task and you do it really well, and you retro yourself, you set those goals, and it helps to slow you down. And I think, you know, completing tasks for me as an individual sets off endorphins, which is incredibly powerful in the working environment. So if I said to myself today, I've got 101 things to do, even before my Slack channel starts going and my email starts going. Slack is an input channel, it's sending me things. Email is an input channel, it's sending me things. Whereas I need to know what I want to try and achieve. And if I can achieve 1, 2, or even 3 of those things, I can walk away from my desk at the end of the day, and I'll know that I've actually achieved those things. I won't remember the Slack messages that I've responded to or the emails that I answered, but I will know I've completed my tasks. So I think setting those goals and being very conscious of your time as an individual, doesn't matter where you are in any business, will make you be more confident, and actually help your well-being, because you're not trying to run the whole time.
Fantastic. That's really good advice. And for you, Jonny, you talked about as you get, you're not that old, but as you've got older, you've maybe seen things a little bit differently, and you know, your perception on life and your career and the way that you manage that has changed. Can you give us some examples, or an example of maybe some of the barriers you've had at an individual level to achieving wellness? So other people have talked about times when they've maybe not been able to go and do that exercise that they enjoy, or that hobby that they enjoy, or they've maybe not spent as much time with their family when they've had young kids. I know you've got a little one, and you know, you have to control that, but that's not always something that you sense that you can control. And I guess we all go through those times where we feel a little bit out of control, and maybe we weren't able to manage that as well as we could. Can you talk to me about maybe some of the barriers you've had to overcome in that journey?
Sure. I mean, so you're right. I have just had a little one. One barrier is being able to control and regulate your relationship. You know, there are times where I am able to come home and put my phone down and spend the evening with my family. And then there are others when you just have to say, I've got this project on, or, you know, this comes first. And we can't forget that we have created this situation we live in because as an individual, I'm willing to step up and go forward and go that extra mile. I think another example for me is I'm quite driven and ambitious, and that usually means that if I'm working on something, I almost want to know what the answer is, because a lot of what I do is linked to analytics, data, providing answers for other people, and then using those answers to provide guidance and solve problems internally. And so I find it quite difficult sometimes as a barrier to say, I'm going to stop working on this project and then go for a run and I'll come back to it, because my mind is fully in that project. And I want to know the answer as much as maybe the person who's more senior than me, who's requested the information. So sometimes that's a bit of a barrier where it's too easy to give up the well-being side of things to want to try and answer and then move on to the next thing. So that's probably another example of a good barrier to me.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's an interesting topic when you think about the internal pressures and the external pressures, isn't it? Because you have external pressure, your boss, your targets, you know, the colleagues sitting next to you are working a bit harder than you, all those sorts of things, how you're performing this quarter. Then you have this internal pressure which you put on yourself, which is probably driven by society and your personality and your upbringing and all those sorts of things. But it's that inner voice, isn't it, that tells you, oh, I can give up that cycle today, I don't need it. Oh, maybe I won't go windsurfing and I'll work on that project. And being able to not control and manage, but identify that inner voice and identify those external pressures and make decisions once you've identified them is important, rather than just flying by the seat of your pants and not taking the time to step back and realize what those pressures are doing to you.
Interestingly, I was reading an article the other day, and it was saying that it believes that this, in some regard, could be a positive experience for some people, because they've been forced to be at home more. They have less of a commute, therefore they have a more applied working day. And because they have a more applied working day, they actually are becoming more creative. And, you know, the term entrepreneurial is used quite a lot. And I think that there's a lot of individuals in business who are quite entrepreneurial. If they are enabled to be creative, i.e. give themselves space, then they can actually be really, really beneficial on the bottom line for businesses, because they're coming up with new ideas, and rather than just thinking it's a new idea and it'll be lost, they actually really believe in it, they document it, they present the case, and that really helps build confidence when people are given that opportunity to be creative and entrepreneurial.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And just for context for anybody watching this, we're recording this right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. So when we talk about this situation, we're talking about the fact that we are all sitting at home in a remote working environment. And I think you're right. We've suddenly been given this option, this choice, where we can put more time into work, or we can put more time into us, because we've lost that commute or that rush hour move that we might be doing. And you know, you have a choice at that point in time. What have you changed in that period? So you've obviously made some decisions, and you've consciously made some decisions. Have you saved on a commute? And if so, what have you done with that time? Are you putting it into your own fitness? Are you putting it into more time with the family, or are you putting it more time into your career and driving things forwards, or all of the above?
So probably a little bit of all of the above. I think because I've not got a commute, I'm actually trying to help my wife. So I do, you know, I get the baby up and I feed the baby, because, you know, there's just the three of us in the house all day, every day. So giving my wife a break is incredibly important. I've obviously tried to make a conscious decision to separate work and life. You know, I'm quite lucky. I've got an office that I can be in, I can shut the door. I try and make sure I step out and have 11 o'clock and have a lunch break. I try and go either cycling, running or walking every day. And then the last thing I wanted to do was I wanted to teach myself something new. And there's lots of things I could do. So I could sit in front of my computer and I could do another online course, or I could read a book. But I thought, if I'm spending all day working, I need to find something that finds a balance between the two. So I've been teaching myself bike mechanics from scratch, because I thought it would be a good experience. It's using my hands. It's teaching me to essentially take something, dismantle it, and then completely rebuild it, which hopefully is helping to, you know, it enables me to think about work and think about new directions and new ideas, as well as learning something new.
Would you describe that as almost a sort of therapy, a meditation in some ways? It's that time when your brain isn't in its normal gear and it's giving it time and space to think and to just be.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Because if you, coming back to that point we made about running too quickly, if you're constantly trying to run all the time, then you're never going to enable your brain enough of a chance to stop and think about, okay, am I happy in my career? Am I happy that the tactics I'm adopting on a daily basis are working? What do my co-workers think I'm doing? It's cathartic, I think, to give yourself space. And hopefully it means I'm also more refreshed, because, you know, coming back to the point we made about age, as you get a little bit older, like, work is a marathon. And yes, you know, we work in startups and they want to grow and they want to be scrappy, but you know, we're going to have to work for another 30 years. So you've got to have that wellness, you've got to be well exercised, and you've got to find ways, whether it be painting, cooking, cleaning, whatever it is that works for you, to just find a way to, you know, switch off, but not switch off.
You know, it's really interesting because you talked about painting, cooking, cleaning, those sorts of things. When people typically think about well-being, I often get one of two things. Either it's our well-being, that's that really holistic thing, it's yoga and hypnosis and meditation, and a lot of people don't necessarily associate with that sort of stuff, or they understand it and it gets labeled as, you know, it's a bit hippie and that sort of stuff. And on the other side, people think of fitness and they think of running, sports, something that that takes a real physical strain out of your body, and not everybody wants to do that or thinks of themselves as sporty and wants to go out for a run or ride a bike or exhaust that kind of stress on their body. It's interesting because you picked some things there that are very normal day-to-day things that anybody can and no doubt does do, but it's finding wellness and well-being in the normal day-to-day, which is the most powerful thing, because not everybody can go and run a marathon, not everybody wants to meditate, not everybody wants to go and see a therapist or focus on being on a really good diet and enjoys cooking. But there are things in everybody's day-to-day life that you could just create a bit more time to do that allow you that space and that thinking time.
There's a brilliant book, I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but it's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And I highly recommend it to anyone. It's a brilliant book, but it talks about this sort of happy medium, which is work is incredibly important, but it's not the be all and end all. And therefore you have to find this happy medium between work and life and where you care and how much you care and what is important in where you should care and how you apply that care. It's a brilliant book. I highly recommend it if you're...
I've just looked at that. Mark Manson. Does that sound right?
Yes.
There you go. He's watching that. There's a good recommendation for a book there.
He's got a couple actually, which I definitely recommend.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jonny. And outside of the things that we've talked about, so you're taking some time now to do your bike mechanics. You've got your kite surfing, your mountaineering. Is there anything on that day-to-day basis that you do to focus on your mental well-being? So we've got the fitness side, and obviously that fitness has a direct link to the mental well-being. But when you think about your career and those times that you've been in high pressure, you know, you've got a big end of quarter, big target, or you've got a big project on and there's a time frame against it, and you're really struggling with some levels of anxiety and stress, what have you done in those scenarios, or what do you do to manage that feeling of overwhelming emotion that you get in those times?
Sure. So everyone has that emotion and everyone feels it. It doesn't matter how strong people come across, or you know, whether they wear their heart on their sleeves or whether they hide it away. Everyone feels those emotions, and I think it's okay to feel those emotions, and it's good for us to feel them because it's perfectly natural, whether we're running away from a big, you know, hairy woolly mammoth or your sales manager. But I think for me, what I've always tried to do is come back to that sort of, you know, your mum and dad mantra, which is you can only ever do your best, and you can only ever do the best with the tools that you're provided with. So quite often, coming back to being overwhelmed, if you've got a deadline or an allotted amount of time, you basically have to work out what you think you can and what you can't achieve. And some people like to make lists, some people like to write stuff down, some people like to have Trello boards, whatever it is that works for you. But I find that making lists or writing down what I can achieve in the time is really helpful. Then it's about having communication and talking with other people. So managing expectations. People get frustrated and upset with people at any level of business when their expectations aren't met and managed. So, you know, if, for example, your boss wants you to do 100 grand and you're going to get to 80, but you're confident you can get to 80, then manage their expectations and explain why. And then that builds that level of relationship and that level of trust. And that can be really, really valuable for, you know, going into the next quarter. I think the last thing is just being able to, you know, it comes back to that thing we talked about, which is to be able to step away. So if you are stressed, if you're having a bad day, it's very easy to continue to sit in your chair work through it, stress, beat yourself up, and things to get worse and worse and worse. Maybe that deal that you wanted to close just hasn't come together, and you've got that failure kick in. Get up from your desk, go for a walk, go and listen to your favorite song, go for a 15-20 minute run, whatever it is that works for you. But I think all of those things combined can really help to reduce anxiety and stress and help you to revisit what's important.
Interesting. I've heard sales managers compared to a lot of things. Never have I heard them compared to woolly mammoths. So I appreciate that. If nothing else, that's made me smile. And just to touch on something you talked about there, I call that no surprise management, that 80,000 versus 100,000 managing expectations thing. Is that as a leader or a manager, I don't want to be fed the lack of truth. I want the truth so I can manage and work with it. And it's okay if we're having honest conversations about that and you're managing expectations. And actually, as an individual, it creates trust, and it creates a support and a help mentality versus a you versus me mentality. And I strongly agree with you on that point.
I think in business as well today that people they don't see the barriers in the same way as before. And I think it comes from sort of schooling and personal development and people doing more sport and exercise and hobbies. But I think the relationships with managers has changed. I think in the 60s, 70s and 80s, it was, I'm your manager and you do as I say. Whereas I think culturally in business now, it's a lot more, what can I learn from you and what can you learn from me? And that helps to relax the situation. Those people both have different requirements and things and objectives and goals, but I think we're better at being more sort of on the same playing field and building those relationships and trust, which I think is super helpful.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I think that's what we as Wellity are trying to do, is create that normal conversation even more so, and make that just the way that people work. Because the reality is, you're right, the types of organizations we work with look like that, but there are still plenty of organizations who are managing in that 60s and 70s way, and it's trying to normalize that it's okay to talk about the battles and the challenges and the difficulties and the fact that you might be battling with an issue around resilience. And we like to refer to it as resilience rather than mental health, because of course the word mental was built into it, which has that negative connotation from the 60s and 70s and 80s, where when we grew up at school, being mental was an insult. And now we're putting it in the very definition of something that we're battling with every day, and we expect people to accept it. So we refer to it as resilience. And I think what we're trying to do is get people to have these conversations, because it starts, like anything, with opening up and talking about it and creating an environment where it's safe and it's normal to do that. Obviously, in your experience, anxiety and stress, and we've talked about this before, have been two things that you see in the sales industry being two of the biggest barriers to mental and physical well-being, primarily on the psychological side, but it does impact on the physical as well. You've given a couple of bits of advice. Is there anything else that you'd say to people that are battling with that right now, either because they're underperforming, or they maybe had something go wrong at work and they're really struggling, or they've just got too much going on? So you've talked about making lists, you've talked about giving yourself time out. Is there anything else that you think people can learn from your experience from around that?
So I think there's a couple of things that I can, or a couple of ways I can answer this question. I think that the first one is to do with strengths and skill sets. So I think certainly as individuals, candid feedback can sometimes be taken in the wrong way, or people's backs go up. And I think it's really important that at any level, but specifically as a sales individual, you start to get comfortable with the feedback that you're receiving from your peers and from those around you. And I think that's a good way of reassessing, is this the right career for me? Am I happy doing this? I thought I wanted a job in sales, and actually I think people underestimate what a job in sales means. There is so many types of jobs in sales. You might move into a CRM manager role, or a sales enablement role, or an operations role, or you might want to go and work in finance, or you might want to retrain in marketing. Like, really assess whether you are actually happy and want to sell. There's a huge number of places you can do this online. Some are better than others, but there are tests you can do, and some people are very anti-personality testing and bucketing people into groups. I personally think that if you can find a balance between constructive feedback from your manager as well as doing some personal tests, whether they are skill set based or personality based, it helps to explain to you where your skills lie. And if you understand where your skills lie, then you can work on improving the things that need development, and you can then hopefully reduce or remove the areas where you're getting stressed and having anxiety. So I think it's really important that as you grow and develop to keep checking in. And there's a lot of mentorship programs that you can do as well, which can be really valuable for people kind of trying to bring out those skills that maybe you want to develop and adapt. And be patient, right? You can't try and be something you're not, so you've got to play to your strengths. And maybe ask others around you who are in different departments what your strengths and weaknesses are. It can be super valuable.
Interesting. Thank you for that. And final question from me: if you are a sales leader or you're a corporate and you employ a large sales team, how much responsibility do you feel is on us as an employer or a leader to create a culture where talking about well-being and focusing people on their mental and physical health and proactively encouraging them to do that is how important is that, and how do you do that within your teams? How do you encourage it? How do you talk about it? How do you normalize that conversation?
Sure. So I think, of all the companies I've worked in historically, a lot of the culture is actually now being driven at a company level, and it's not departmentalized in that way. It's not, we're the sales team, we're at the sharp end and therefore it's just on us. I think health and well-being sits more at a level across the whole company. So it impacts engineers, it impacts marketers, it impacts finance people. We're all the same in that regard. So all the businesses I've worked with work at a company level, and that culture then manifests itself in hiring, and it manifests itself in the kind of activities that you do as a team. Salespeople are driven by targets. We that is something that I don't think is going to go away. But I think doing things as a team and building connections and relationships with other teams is super, super valuable. So I would encourage people to, if that's not being done at a company level through HR, personnel, head of people, investigate why not, because it then tends to manifest in hiring and culture and values and how you build diversity in a business. And I think if you can build diversity in a business, then it's super valuable in terms of building a great team. And then you're more likely to hit those targets, because you'll get different skill sets that are helping to guide you on your journey, and therefore hopefully reducing your anxieties and stresses.
Jonny, that's brilliant input. And is there anything else that you would share with the audience in terms of any other nuggets or any other input on this topic of wellbeing, particularly if we're focusing on that sales industry and people that work in and around sales? Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I think so. Something I'm a big reader. I like to read business books and all of the sales publications and that kind of thing. But I think it's about finding your little thing that works. So I was reading a brilliant one the other day, which was about a guy who has a jar, that's just like a jam jar or a glass on his desk. And every time he makes the sales call or has to make another step forward to a task, he moves a penny or a paperclip into the glass each day. And I think it's about finding ways of taking something highly personal. Selling is really, really personal. We know we live in the age where 60-70% of people have already made their decision before they engage in the sales process. It's an emotional thing. People buy on authenticity. So it's about taking something that at the moment, in the COVID world is happening just over screens all the time, and turning it into something natural and physical, or finding something that works for you as a way of celebrating your successes, but also celebrating failures, because we didn't get anywhere and we don't get anywhere if you don't have failures, and it's okay to fail, but review it and learn from it, and that's how we grow and develop as individuals, and that's how we grow and develop as teams.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, I read something last week on a similar thing. It was about micro wins and celebrating micro achievements. So we all have big goals, and we set annual goals, and we set quarterly goals and monthly goals. And then with COVID-19, it's kind of the rug been pulled out of from underneath everybody in a lot of ways, and we need to reset our mindset around the micro things. So sometimes just getting out of bed, getting dressed, and working, getting to work, so to speak, in your spare room or your office or wherever it might be, that's something that's an achievement for some people at the moment, where they might be battling with mental health, or they might be difficult, and that's relative to them and it's personal to them. Whereas others, it might be, I got out and did that run, or I managed to achieve this, or I managed to do that, or and it was just talking about trying to realign your goal setting and identify the small things that normally you just take for granted. But today and now, with the state of things, you have to celebrate little things that are there so that you keep yourself positive. So it's a really interesting topic that I think is very timely right now. Jonny, thanks for joining us today. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. You've given us some fantastic insight, and it's great to get your perspective on all things wellbeing. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Wellity, for having me.